My roommate calls my boyfriend our boyfriend. I, 19, have been dating my boyfriend Will, 20, for about 6 months now. I have been in relationships before, but this is definitely my first serious and healthy one, and I'm really happy with him. We met in our hometown, but we go to different universities that are about 2 hours apart. However, we try to see each other whenever we can, maybe about every 3 weeks. Usually, Will come and visit me, because A, he has a car, so it's cheaper / more convenient for him, plus bus routes between our cities no longer exist since Greyhound shuttered. B, a lot of his courses are still online only, whereas I have in-person lectures, and C, my house is a lot nicer than his. Whenever he visits, he stays for 4 to 5 days, which my roommates are okay with. He's also very nice and helpful. If I'm doing chores, he'll help, or he'll help take out the trash / wash dishes / make me breakfast, etc. One of my roommates, Cass, 19, was dumped near the end of September, and since then, I felt like she has been weird with Will. A few examples: sometimes he'll cook for me if I'm busy at school or working late at the lab, and oftentimes he'll make enough for my roommates too. Almost every time this happens, Cass makes comments about how he's so sweet and that she wishes she had someone like him and how her ex could never. Will and I usually reassure her and say she'll definitely find someone who'll treat her right, but she just looks at him expectantly. Expecting what? I don't know. When he helps with manly stuff like taking out the trash, installing a hook in my room, moving heavy things, she always makes sure to linger around and comment about how strong he is and how I'm lucky to have such a fit partner. Whenever he visits, we literally can't avoid her. If we go out, Cass will ask to come with us. My roommates and I use an app that tracks our location for safety reasons, and when I go out with Will and don't tell her, she'll usually text me asking me where I'm doing, what my plans are, if I want to hang out, etc. We try to stay in my room, but if Will goes into the kitchen or something, Cass will always happen to wander in. We have to lock my bedroom door when we sleep to make sure she doesn't come in. I'm not much of a drinker, but after our midterms, Cass wanted to have a little thing with just the roommates. It was fun. We drank a little and watched movies. I'm pretty lightweight, so I got sloshed pretty fast, and at some point I was calling Will, and when Cass found out I was calling him, she was like, "Is that Will?" and kept ripping the phone from my hands very aggressively. She's a lot stronger than I am, and really loudly started talking about her intimate life and asking him about his, saying shit like, "Make sure you hit it deep." This is pretty in character for Cass, who claims to enjoy making people uncomfortable and makes these kinds of comments for shock value, but I felt like she should have turned it off around my boyfriend. She was only tipsy at this point, not really drunk. Overall, anytime he's nice to her, she'll say things like, "Haha, it's almost like you're my boyfriend," and whenever she refers to him around me, she'll call him our boyfriend as a joke, but I still feel weird about it. Will finds this all very uncomfortable and tries his best to avoid Cass as best he can or shut her down when she makes those comments. I'm not sure if I should bring it up with her, because on one hand, I'm very uncomfortable, but on the other hand, I feel like she'll just deny everything or say it's all for jokes and maybe get hostile with me. I was alone with one of my roommates, Jen, and I started to bring up Cass' behavior around Will. I didn't even get a sentence in before Jen stopped me and said, "I know. She's been weird." Apparently, Jen and our fourth roommate Eva have discussed this before, but they weren't sure if I even noticed because I didn't seem to react. Jen is definitely the closest to Cass. We all went to high school together, but I was only really friends with Eva at that time. She said she brought it up privately with Cass after Will's last visit, and Cass just did that thing where she talks and incoherently defends herself. Eva and Jen agreed to step in if crap got out of hand with her. Cass was very excited for Will's visit, and would say stuff like, "Oh, I can't wait to see him," or "Just a few more days. I have a test from 7 to 9 p.m. on his second day here," and apparently she talked to Jen about picking out a movie for the two of them to watch while I wrote my biochem test. She settled on Sinister 2 for anyone wondering. Jen said that she was out of line, but again, Cass just incoherently defends herself. Every time she made comments like that, my roommates and I would just silently give her a look and say, okay, anyways, and change the subject, which seemed to at least make her self-conscious. Cass was all over him as soon as he got here, pouting and saying, "Where's my hug?" Jen hugged her instead, and we used this time to escape into my room. Day 2 rolls around, and as soon as I'm out of the house, she tries to get Will to watch the movie with her, saying she really wants to watch it but doesn't think she can do it alone. Will politely declines and continues playing video games in my room, and she leaves. Throughout the rest of the visit, I'm firm with her, telling her she can't come on our dates, saying she's being weird when she makes comments about how hot he is or how he's our boyfriend. Will has also done what one commenter suggested and just point blank says that he's my boyfriend and that he'll never be hers. At some point, he's so aggravated he stops talking to her or acknowledging her at all because he was worried he would yell at her. I've never heard him raise his voice before this. As time wore on, I felt like she got increasingly desperate for Will's attention. This is the absolute craziest part. Just now, while I was showering, Cass went into my room, where Will is, in her underwear and a bathrobe, saying she knows he's playing hard to get but that he can't resist her. Barf. Will started yelling at her to get the heck out, which alerted myself and my roommates. Eva and Jen dragged a tearful Cass out of my room. She even called me a skinny B word on her way out. I think they're going to drop her off at a friend's house tonight. I'm just effing floored. I really did not expect her to go nuclear like this, but goddamn.
My pastor keeps trying to do inappropriate things to me, but my parents don't believe me, so I'm taking matters in my own hands. So I'm a 13-year-old boy being raised by ultra-religious parents who force me to attend the church as well as be an active member in it. The church I am forced to attend seems more like a cult to me than an actual church too. The church is very shady, its pastors are very weird. Just last week I was told by one of the leaders in the church that I must give my mind, spirit and body to this church whenever it is required, as love is the path to salvation. There was also a rumor a year ago that one of the pastors quit because he roped a little girl. The indoctrination that I have experienced in this church has been deeply traumatizing to me, and it is a big reason as to why I don't necessarily believe in God myself. Of course, this is not something I can ever bring up to my parents, as any disagreement with them on the matters of God or the church usually warrants my dad getting angry and even sometimes physically violent. My mother is no better. Whenever I voice my opinion to her, I usually get the silent treatment, or I'm told something along the lines of me being a heretic and that I'm going down a dark path. So on to the problem at hand. I am an altar boy at the church, as my parents essentially force me to be one. I carry out all the usual things the altar boy has too. It makes me sick, I really do not enjoy it. Bringing things to the pastor, standing there looking all holy while having to pretend that nothing is wrong, when in reality, there is something deeply wrong. And what's wrong is that I have managed to catch the eye of one of the pastors. He is in his mid-50s and on the outside, seems like a regular pastor. All pompous in his faith, believing that his way is the holy way and that any deviation from the Holy Bible will result in eternal damnation. My first bad interaction with him came 1 month ago. He and I were alone in the back setting stuff up for Mass, and we were not talking. I try to talk as little as I can to the pastors, they freak me out. Well, this pastor, let's call him John, initiated a conversation with me. At first it was a small talk about faith and religion, but it turned intimate when he said, "I've been trying to suppress my urges for so long, but being around you makes it so hard." I kind of went blank, and I'm sure he noticed, as he changed the topic very quickly. I didn't tell my parents yet, as I figured there was nothing to be scared of. Well, the next week it happened again. I was alone with him in the back and he spoke about what I said last week. I don't want you to take it the wrong way at all. I also want you to keep in mind that your body belongs to Christ. If Christ ever wants anyone to have your body, you must abide by his wishes. He knows best, remember that. I didn't respond, I didn't even look at him. By now my concerns were growing, but I still didn't tell anyone, especially not my parents. Well, 2 weeks ago is when this pastor tried to get touchy for the first time. I was in the back with him, again. The only reason I have to help him out is because he specifically requests my parents that I help him because I am a great help, and of course my parents jump at this opportunity to gain some reputation in the church. So here I am, setting things up with the pastor, looking away from him, when I feel him come up behind me. I turned around and he had this menacing look on his face. He told me, "I've tried so hard not to do this. But you've made it too hard," and with that sentence he extended his hand and tried to place it in my bottoms and then reached for my PP. I pushed his hand away and told him no, but he tried again. I was forced to run out. Because we were setting up for Mass, I had to stand there and be the altar boy as this pastor led the Mass, and it was nauseating doing so. When I got home I couldn't take it anymore. I told my father what the pastor did. I desperately hoped he would believe me. But he didn't. He slapped me for talking that way about a man of God. He then told me if I make any other accusations like that I won't get off so easy. I tried to tell my mother, but she sided with my dad. I cried a lot that night, knowing that I'm kind of trapped here. That same night is when I realized that if my parents won't help me, I can help myself. My parents thankfully bought me a phone last year, and I was going to put it to use. The next time I was helping that pastor set up for Mass, I was going to get him. So that's what I did. Last weekend, my parents forced me to once again to help the pastor. He seemed surprised to see me, but welcomed me in and led me to the back nonetheless. I had my phone in my pocket at this time. Phones are not allowed in the back, but I didn't care. When we were setting up, I began audio recording everything on my phone. I provoked my pastor by asking him what he meant by me having to give my body to whoever Christ wants. And he fell for the bait. He went on to basically explain that if any man of God wishes to have access to my body, that they can, because that is Christ's wish, and I am in no position to defy Christ. I kept setting traps like this the whole time, and he kept falling for them. I even got him to try to touch me again, before running out and claiming I changed my mind to him. Mass was going to start soon, so we didn't have much time. I did the Mass and hid my phone in the back for the duration of it, then picked it up myself when we were leaving. Nor my pastor, nor my parents ever noticed. I have the audio recording of my pastor essentially admitting to wanting to be a child lover, as well as an audio recording of him trying to touch me. I know I can go to the police with this. I just don't know when.
My little sister is inviting my ex-fiancé and his partner to her wedding. He essayed me, cheated on me and left me homeless. This means I will not be attending. My other family members are horrified at her decision and are not attending either. I just feel betrayed and heartbroken by my sister. I don't understand how she could do this. I, 33 female, was with my ex-fiancé, 31 male, for over 12 years. 3 years ago we moved for his work, and this was 200 miles away from my family. We couldn't sell our house, so to afford the new rental near his work, we rented out the house we owned in my hometown. Moving day came, and my family helped us move all of the house contents, all my possessions, my pets, everything to the new place. I unloaded the van and went straight back to my hometown to get my house ready for the tenant. I cleaned it all, made sure the repairs were done, and then the day the tenant moved in, My ex-fiancé broke up with me via text. I had no home. He banned me from the new rental, a tenant was now in the home I owned. My pets and belongings were gone. I was so heartbroken and distraught. I later found out he had been cheating on me for a while with a friend he told me he sees as a sister. This girl was always over our house. I thought she was my friend. This was his cowardly plan to get the move sorted and house rented and break up from afar. After being distanced and the initial heartbreak worked through, I began to realize how abusive he had been. I had let a lot slide. He had been diagnosed with a condition that meant he could die at any moment, so anything abusive he did, I excused or didn't make a fuss of. He would use his diagnosis when it was convenient to get his way. He would throw things at me because it made him laugh. Anything we did was his choice. He wouldn't let me have friends over. He would enjoy seeing me cry. To get this reaction, he would often play the music he had picked for his funeral. If I was ever sick, he'd be angry with me. He would make fun of my weight every day, jabbing me. He would do this in public too. He would grab any part of my body whenever he pleased, no matter how much I asked him to stop. Towards the end of the relationship, there were times when love-making was incredibly painful. I would cry and ask him to stop. He never did. After the breakup, I asked him why he did this. He said he got carried away. My sister knows all of this, and she had zero sympathy. When I told her about the essay, she said, "Why would you try to ruin a good man's name?" After that, we didn't speak for a while. When she broke up with her fiancé, they broke up multiple times, she behaved as if she understood me and sympathized with what had happened. She also said she no longer had contact with my ex. We started speaking again and became close. She then got back with her fiancé. This guy has been violent towards her, thrown her out the house multiple times, takes MDMA and lays his hands on my sister. He even went as far as putting cameras in their house so he could see if she had guests over. My family has tried their best to help her. We each have given her a place to go to build her life again, but she has gone back to him each time, and this time they are planning a wedding and she is now pregnant. My sister grew up knowing my ex. She was 13 when they met and she saw him like a brother. My fiancé always said she was a loser and an idiot behind her back, but he was always nice to her face. I would defend her each time. He also would say to me, "If I wanted to hurt you, I'd sleep with your sister." I believed her when she said she no longer was in contact with my ex. Turns out that was a lie. She's carried on having contact with him the whole time. By inviting my ex and his affair partner, she knows this means I will not attend. The rest of our immediate family are also not attending because of this. I just don't understand her. I'm just so hurt, sad and heartbroken.
I grounded my son after he painted his nails. Now he hasn't spoken to me for an entire year. I love my teenage son, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed in the type of man he has been growing up to be. My son started developing a sort of alternative style ever since he was in middle school. It started with him wearing all black, but ever since he entered high school, he's taken his weird fashion extremely far, and I'm just not a fan. My wife doesn't seem to mind, but she's a pretty passive woman and has never been a very strict parent like me. If I were to describe how my son dresses now, he wears big baggy black clothing and lots of chains and rings. At one point, he was even dyeing colored strips into his hair. I remember being so upset the first day I saw this. It was just so embarrassing to see my child walking around like that. Now I don't have a problem with gay people or anything like that, but I never really wanted that type of thing to be a part of my own household. I've never confronted my son about his sexuality, and I really just don't want to know if he does happen to be gay. Our relationship is already sort of strained, and I feel like if I found out he wasn't straight, it would make it very hard for me to treat him the same. Like I said, I don't have a problem with gay people, I just don't want to be shoved in my face. On top of everything, ever since my son entered high school, he has made friends with mostly girls. At first, I was glad to see this, and I was happy that my son still might have a chance at growing up into a real man's man. But as time went on, I realized that he wasn't in a relationship with any of these girls. Instead, they were all just his close friends. He constantly has his friends over the house, and is part of a friend group with 3 other girls. To be fair, these girls have always been nothing but polite to me and my wife and are always respectful of our house. Still, it just rubs me the wrong way that my son doesn't seem to have many close guy friends, and I feel like it's not good for him to grow up that way. I tried my best to be non-judgmental towards my son, even though to me, he looked like more of a freak of nature every day the more he kept leaning into his alternative fashion. I didn't understand it since all of his friends were normal girls. He was the only weirdo in his friend group who dressed like some sort of 90s mall rat. When I look at him, he honestly reminds me of the kind of kids I would pick on in high school. Anyway, about a year ago, I ran out of patience with him when he came home one day with his nails painted a shade of bright blue. My son had never done anything like this before, and I couldn't help but feel overwhelmingly disgusted. I told him that he had gone too far with his emo bullshit and that I couldn't continue letting him make a fool out of himself like this. I told him that, at one point, he needed to become a man, and painting his nails made him look like some sort of weak tea. My son and I had never really been close, we didn't even speak that often, so he looked very hurt as I was telling him all this. But I couldn't help it, he had needed a reality check for so long, and there was no avoiding this conversation. I told my son to go get nail polish remover and remove his nail polish right there in front of me. That's when he started to get angry and said that he didn't have to change himself just to appease my Doomba homophobic self. My son has never spoken to either of his parents this way, and I knew that there was no way I was letting him get away with it. I yelled at him for cursing at me like that, and I told him that he would remove his nail polish immediately or there would be serious consequences. He said that there was nothing worse I could do to him than continue being such a hateful father, and that's when I lost my poop. I told him that I would ground him for the entire year if he didn't remove his nail polish within the next 60 seconds. He looked at me and told me that I could try, but I would never be able to control him, and that he hated me. He ran up to his room after this, and I followed through on my threat. I took his phone away and replaced it with a flip phone, and he wasn't allowed to go out or have his friends over anymore. All he did after that for the rest of the year was call his friends in his room and completely ignore me. One night I overheard him crying to my wife about how much he hated his life since being grounded, but all she said was that I was his father and he needed to respect me. I was proud of my wife for sticking up to me behind closed doors, and I still felt like I had made the right decision. I won't lie and say that it hasn't been a difficult year. My son stopped talking to me the day I grounded him, and I honestly do miss him. He graduates next year, and I just hope before then, he'll realize that I was only ever trying to do what was best for him. I grounded my violent son after he attacked his mother. He is now with my parents and refuses to come home. My wife and I have a daughter Megan and sons Matt and Joshua. It's been 2 months since my younger son Josh has been obsessed with the idea that his mom was favoring our other kids over him. After he told me this, I secretly started to watch my wife's behavior with our kids. I noticed that she would always ask Megan and Matt to go on runs with her while Josh had to ask her. She would also talk more to the older kids and neglect Joshua. Don't get me wrong, she loves Josh and enjoys spending time with him, just not as much as with Megan and Matt. When I asked my wife if she noticed this too, she said no and reassured me that she loves all our kids equally. I asked her to include Josh more and she promised she would, but Josh still complained and started distancing his mom. I continued observing the situation and concluded that the problem was that my wife's favoritism would manifest in very little things. It was hard to catch what caused this difference until one day everything became clear. When I was at a friend's house, my family had planned to decorate the Christmas tree together. This was a little ritual in our house, and as you can imagine, Josh was forgotten again. My wife and the other kids decorated the Christmas tree without telling him, and when Josh came downstairs and saw the decorated tree, he confronted his mother. According to my daughter, my wife said, "Oh, I didn't know you're home." This answer made my 11-year-old snap, and he started hitting his mom in the face with his bare fists. He also kicked and punched his siblings when they tried to protect her, but soon enough everything stopped when my wife fell onto the floor. I rushed home as soon as I found out. My wife's left eye was red and a bit swollen, her nose bleed and her neck was dark red. My wife was in a state of shock and couldn't talk to me. After I controlled myself, I called my father and told him what happened. He agreed to come and take Josh to their house. I told my parents to keep him there for a week until my wife recovered and things calmed down. A few days later my parents gave me a quick update letting me know that everything was good with Josh. He seemed to behave. I decided to talk to my wife about what had happened, and she told me how she came from work and Josh was nowhere to be seen. She called his name but he never showed up, so she thought that he was at a friend's house. I wasn't sure if I believed her story because it was common for Josh to stay quiet. My wife demanded therapy for him and said that she didn't wish to remain in the same room as him if they were left alone. I tried explaining how that'll just make things worse. I also added how therapy cannot him because he isn't even a teen yet. A week later Josh called us through our grandparents and apologized to his mom. They had a good mother and son moment, so I asked my wife if we should bring Josh back, but she seemed terrified of the idea. She asked if we could wait another week, to which I agreed. I knew leaving him out for a long time would be terrible for him, but there was no way another week would influence him that much. My parents were against the idea because they thought the kid was homesick. I asked them to be patient and luckily they kept him. I never knew that keeping him a week longer would change so much. The next time we talked to him, he showed clear signs of hatred towards my wife and me. When we asked him what was wrong, he told us that we didn't love him anymore. We weren't able to change his mind and he refuses to come home to this day. He says how he feels loved by his grandparents and wants to stay. My wife and I aren't sure how to return him to our family.
My mother-in-law wants to share my husband and I's bed when she comes to visit. My mother-in-law has always been really weird towards my husband. Whenever she's around, she's constantly touching him. Whenever she comes to visit, she spends the entire time holding my husband's hand and stroking his hair, and I have even seen her sit on his lap here and there. I never really brought up how weird I found her behavior towards my husband, since I'm not very close with my own mom and I figured maybe their relationship was more normal than it looked. But recently, she's gone way too far, and I wished I hadn't let all her past behaviors slip until now. My husband has never mentioned his mom being overbearing or overly touchy, so I was nervous to ever have to bring it up. My husband and I moved into our new house about 2 months ago. It's far from our hometown, and my mother-in-law had a full-on panic attack when she found out we were moving far away from her. I listened to my husband reassure her again and again that she could visit and we would come to visit her often. Secretly, it was making my stomach turn to hear all this. I was happy to get distance from her since she has always been so involved in our lives. I wanted to start my husband and I's family in a fresh new area and not have his mom around every day. When we still lived in the same town as her, she would come over literally every single day. I'm not even exaggerating. My husband gave her a key to our old place without asking me, and she was in our house all the time. She even caught up being intimate once, and the next day she had the nerve to ask me to please act more ladylike. "Lady, I live here, not you." She was already giving us so much grief for moving away, but her latest request is my last goddamn straw. I've officially had it with my mother-in-law to the point where I'm considering making my husband choose if he wants me or her in his life. My mother-in-law invited herself to come visit us the week we moved into our house, and my husband accepted without mentioning a word to me. He told me she was coming the day of, and I told him I was getting tired of him always putting his mother ahead of our marriage. He said that he was just trying to be a good son and that he loved his mom. I asked if he loved me too, and he just kissed the top of my head and hugged me to end the conversation. When his mom arrived that night, I saw that she had put her overnight bag in the master bedroom, where me and my husband slept. I told her I had set up the guest bedroom for her, and I tried to pick up her things to carry them in there. To my absolute shock, she just giggled and took her things out of my hands. She looked me in the eyes and said, "That's all right, I'm gonna be sleeping in here right next to my baby." Talking about my husband, of course. I couldn't believe she was really suggesting that she would sleep next to my husband in our bed. I hadn't wanted her to visit so soon in the first place, and now she wanted to share my bed? Instead of arguing with her, I talked to my husband in private and told him I was obviously uncomfortable with that and that it was time to set some much-needed boundaries with his mom. I wanted to cry tears of anger when instead, my husband said she would only be here for a couple of days and that we should let her share our bed since she was still adjusting to all this. I'm fuming. All this has made me realize that I married a full-on mama's boy who will always pick his creepy mom over me. I am not sleeping in bed with that woman. I decided to leave the night and I've been taking some time away from my husband while I reevaluate this marriage. He can stay there with mommy dearest since he seems to see her as the love of his life.